Welcome, everybody,
Hello
to
again.
another episode of IDK WTF I'm Doing podcast.
That means I don't know what the fuck I'm doing podcast. Today we have an awesome person on the cast today. Been following this guy a little bit on TikTok. That's how I was introduced to him. And come to find out, he's got all sorts of cool things about him that you heard in the bio, where he's been on TEDx, he's spoken at the UN, and he's lived all over the world. And so we're really excited to talk to this guy because I think he has a few, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing stories, but also some great value that he can bring to you today to help you, your business, and your life to move forward at a more thriving pace.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on here and excited to share stories. Telling stories is my favorite thing to do. And so I'm humbled to be in your presence. And to anyone else watching anywhere, hi, mask up. And I love
you. Well, we're honored that you're here joining us today. For our audience, can you just give us a little bit of a bio, kind of where you came from and kind of what you do?
Most people don't know this, but I'm from Krypton. Superman is my cousin. But on the passport, I'm from Nigeria.
I think at this point, like, no one would be that surprised if that was actually true.
Especially now that we know that aliens exist from the United States government. I mean, now we can trust that information.
That's right. That's right. I'm from Nigeria. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and I grew up as the son of a diplomat. So that meant we traveled a lot. I grew up in 5 countries and 4 continents. So I call myself a cultural translator. I also had the experience. I always say I had the experience of being Black on 4 continents, and that has its own set of stories. I'm sure we'll get into those very soon. But it leads into the work that I do, which is helping companies and individuals connect effectively across cultures. I had the personal experience of knowing what it's like to be excluded and to have an identity crisis. And as I was finding myself, going down that journey of finding myself, you start to get familiar with certain systems of oppression. At some point down the line, I felt like I wanted to fight those systems of oppression, and I built a business around that.
Yeah. Nice. And where are you in the world today?
New York City.
Ooh, the Big Apple.
The Big Apple.
That's what they call it, right? Okay.
That's what they call it. It's the city so nice they named it twice.
I love that. That's so hilarious. Reminds me of a YouTube and TikTok reactor. Actually, he says, if it sounds nice, you play it twice.
There you go.
Yeah, I like that. I like that saying. So what do you find, being in New York City, you definitely talk about culture, diversity, and, the Big Apple is definitely a big place for that. We are actually, what they call us, natives in Colorado. And so it was a place that wasn't as diverse as it is today. And so it's actually really great that we're seeing a lot more diversity here. But the Big Apple has pretty much always been diverse. So has New York also kind of had some imprints on you and your business to really help it thrive?
Yeah, New York was my first intentional move. And I say that because, every other place I was there for school. I came there, for my parents had me there, things like that. And so the move to New York, WTF story in the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
Let's hear it.
So August 22, 2012, I was driving in my burgundy Toyota Camry at the time. I used to live in Virginia. I lived in a town that's unfortunately called Lynchburg. A small college town. And I went to this predominantly Christian university. It's called Liberty University. And so it was an interesting experience because that was my introduction to the United States of America. It was very different from She's All That, 10 Things I Hate About You, any of the things I've seen. And so I was like, okay, all right, this is a little different. But, you start to learn how to navigate that. But part of that, it was a small college town, and I've always been kind of, I guess, a boisterous personality. And at that point, August 22, 2012, I had taken this job because I had over 85 plus job rejections for various reasons. My visa, you're not a citizen. People thought I was too idealistic. I always had this grand visions of trying to change the world. Nelson Mandela and Oprah Winfrey
I relate to that.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. But they all kept shutting me down, and I only, you only have a few options if you're not a citizen. So I wound up convincing someone I'd interned with before to say, hey, well, this Twitter thing is starting off. I have a good following there. Do you think, we could do something? I have a degree in marketing. He brought me on, and then, they quickly changed my job to sales without any orientation, and found myself doing this, having a $10,000 quota and a month quota, and I just hated the job. But I was feeling guilty for feeling bad about that, because it's like you can't look a gift horse in the mouth. You're here.
You're lucky to have a job.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're Nigerian, you're a lawyer, engineer, doctor, or failure. So
right, yeah,
heading towards that failure category. But so yeah, I'd been in this job for a little bit, and then as I was driving to work, I got to the part where the road merged into the highway. I was cruising down my lane, and all of a sudden, my lane got cut into half, and then this neighboring car had lost control. So I swerved out of the way so I didn't get hit, and I smashed into left guardrail. One car, boom, two cars, boom, right guard, boom, 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 and I hit the car, the left guardrail again with such impact. The car is about to flip over the bridge. It's perpendicular, and I'm 22 years old at the time. All the cliche things, what have you done with your life? I was this kid that was gonna, impact the world, and here I was in a job I hated in a town I didn't want to live in. I'm about to die without anything to say. Simultaneously, adrenaline kicked in. I slammed my brakes. I somehow pushed through the door, and I got out of the car. And if you were standing next to me on the highway, you'd have seen, and then two other cars were there. But the miraculous thing that happened was I was unharmed. My car was totaled, but I was unharmed, and two other cars hit. And I just looked up, and I was like, you know what, God, I'm quitting this job. And if you're not a citizen, you either get married, you go to school, or you find a job, right, that supports you. So I was coming down in my visa status. I didn't know how I was going to go to New York City. I just knew New York City was the city that I wanted to go to because it was the backdrop of all my favorite TV shows and movies. And I felt some life there. So, and I just wanted to live. I almost died, but I wanted to feel life right now. Yeah. So I wanted to find life, and I was pretty much dying in the city. And so New York City was what came to mind. It reminded me of my hometown of Lagos. And so I was like, I'm going to start studying for my MBA. Took my I said my MCAT. that is for my medical exam. I took my GMAT, and then just moved to the city. Quit my job. They didn't know. They was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm moving to the city."
Surprise!
Didn't know anyone moved there, and then that's when I began my career in earnest. And there's been a few more stories about that since then, but that was the turning point.
Yeah.
So how did that conversation look when you were telling, I assume your parents, that you were saying, hey.
It was mixed. See, with my parents, and I love my parents, and now they appreciate all my stubbornness, but you understand the politics of your parents at this point. And so I knew if I couched it with higher education, and they're like, "Oh no, I'm getting my MBA, Dad."
So that was the compromise.
It's like, oh,
right?
okay.
that was the compromise. The difficult conversation was when I decided not to do anything with my MBA and decided to launch a company without going, down the route of Deloitte or all the other companies. That was the more difficult conversation, because I was going to school, and then I was telling my dad, "Look, I launched this podcast. It's doing really well. I'm not making any money from it, but I feel like I'm passionate about this, and I feel like I have an audience, and I'm going to grow it. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I'm just not going to do a job that I hate." But he can understand that. I grew up under two dictatorships initially, and they grew up under several other dictatorships. So self-preservation is a big part for them. And so this kid who is daring, who, as Obama would say, has the audacity of hope, despite all these things, it was a little bit. They were like, he hasn't done anything that we can really say is bad, but he keeps making us nervous. So we're going to cautiously trust him. But so that was a more difficult conversation. But the MBA was like, "Oh yeah, you're going up there." So they felt good about that.
So I think our listeners and viewers can take some good strategy from this for those who have parents that you feel you really need to find a way to get to them. Because I could completely relate to that. I come from a family, and we've talked about this in the podcast before. Comes from a family from a lot of high education. Even though we're not immigrants, there's a lot of pressure just kind of already put into the family that you go, you get a degree, you get an awesome job, you work there for 60 years, that whole bit. And I was like, I'm no longer doing that. I'm not going to England for school. I'm actually going to stay here and be a business owner. And nobody got that. And it wasn't until I literally published my book, even though they knew it was coming out, it wasn't until I presented that to my grandmother where she finally was like, "Oh, like, I see you're actually doing something, right? So I can
true.
definitely understand that, and I think a lot of our listeners can understand that too.
Yeah.
So find any way to get there. I think even just, hey, I'm going for higher education. They'll be like, okay, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times parents, and it's all, often in the best interest, but sometimes, you have to let your kids, fail, experience, or grow. And a lot of times I've noticed, and I had this conversation with my mom and dad, they're looking at us through the lens that they grew up in.
Yeah.
And it's not the same backdrop, but it's all a learning experience. I had to learn how to be a better son as they have to learn how to be a better parent. So,
which I think is a great segue to my next question, which is a lot of what you do today in diversity, communication, and cross-cultural interactions, even if it's cross-parental interactions. How is a lot of, you were brought up in different countries, you've traveled a lot, you've had to really immerse yourself into different cultures out of sheer livelihood. But today, what is your mission really with what you do now? You're a TEDx speaker, you got a book out, you got a podcast, but what's the overall arcing mission that you have with what you do?
Yeah, the overall mission is truly to fight systems of oppression. And I believe we live in a world that has sometimes archaic standards for certain groups of people, right? I remember as a kid, I share another WTF story.
We love it.
So I was when I was the age of 10, my dad got posted to Burkina Faso. It's a French-speaking country in West Africa.
Ooh.
And so I was this skinny Nigerian kid with a thick Nigerian accent in a French-speaking country in an American international school going through puberty.
Whoa.
Yeah. So pre-K, I went to this American international school, but pre-K to grade 12 was the combination of maybe if that 120 people. So everybody knew each other.
Yeah.
And I was walking down, I was 10 and trying to find myself, and you hear someone making fun of your hair. Like, why does your hair curl up in a ball like that? Or your hair is so weird. And I remember going back home wanting, trying to convince my mom to straighten it. And she was, because I was using Backstreet Boys and NSYNC as my frames of reference. And he had to explain to me that, the importance of your blackness and your hair and how that matters. And I say that story to say that was a beauty standard, right? That I was I was looking at European standard, and the same sort of thing happens everywhere, right? In many parts, in schools, the history is taught from, you don't teach pre-colonial history. You teach history through usually a white or European lens, not celebrating the other things. And my goal in life is to expand all the stories that I can, all right, and foster more, critical thinking into those elements. And the industries I want to work with are in workplaces, which I do with my consulting firm, education, and media. And then the overlying, arch behind that is mental health. I think each of us, whether they're pronounced or suppressed, we have some childhood traumas or some traumas. 2020 was a traumatic year for anyone, even thinking about that. But we haven't had language to communicate through those things. And when you add discrimination and things like that, it's some cultures just tell you suck it up and you don't process, and then it materializes in other parts of the world. So I'm really trying to promote vulnerability and expand those stories that fight against those oppressive and suppressive.
That's awesome. We talk about specifically trauma a lot on our podcast. It's
I love that. You do for real? That's amazing.
Oh, every podcast somehow just pops up.
And that's something I talk about a lot, is having the words and the language to discuss these deep inner issues. And the more that we can have the words about it, like even discussing what reactivity or trauma blocking, all those kind of things are like, if we have the words and we all know the words and we can discuss it, then we can move through it.
Yeah, it also becomes less scary or less, unfamiliar in a sense, though you're more comfortable to approach it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think what you're doing is really, really great.
Yeah.
Oh, whoa. Thank you so much. You're so kind. But it's funny, even to tie this back to the parent story, and I talk about this with my parents. My parents know this. I come from a culture where therapy isn't encouraged. Be a man, don't be a girl, all this stuff. And those are things I have to unlearn. And ironically, you think about masculinity. It's one of the things I love to do is to redefine masculinity, and the ways to be cool were to be the silent type, or or to be the one that was funny, or the one that got all the ladies, or all these things. These are the tropes, right? Mm-hmm. And as I was trying to do all these things as a kid, trying to fit into all these different parts of the world, I found that I was actually more of an emotional person, more like my mom, and I was prone to outbursts. I didn't know how to to communicate any of these things, because I've always been told, don't show your emotions, but it was all brimming in there. And then eventually it
comes out somehow.
Yeah, it come out. And so I turned to writing. That's how I started writing in 2015. And that helped me, speaking of language, understand that. And so I started having these uncomfortable conversations with my parents and other systems. And I said, we need to reinvestigate traditions. Frankly, they're toxic, right? They're not helpful. And so I love that you two focus on trauma, because I go to therapy every week. I talk about all my my follies, and I try to do that with my platforms as well.
Yeah, you address a lot of things, and your topic in general can be controversial, I believe, right? Like, because I used to do a lot of generation talks and consulting for corporations, and we're just talking about baby boomers and millennials mostly, right? Yeah. And that just brought on a lot of people and a lot of heat and a lot of opinions sometimes. So I can imagine when you're talking about a lot of the stuff you're talking about, or even on your TikToks, you talk about one general that pops up in my mind recently was that you said that you have lived through 2 coups around the world. And then BLM happened this year as well. And so it's, there's just a lot of hot topics going on, and you're kind of a good focal point for all those things. So kind of like help us, all of us who are listening to you with your insight, with all of this heat happening. How can people really begin to have conversations and also feel like they're in a safe place to have those conversations?
So in the book, I talk about it. I say, educate, don't perpetuate, instead communicate. I'll break it down. I'm a poet, so I like to rhyme. Sorry. But in the education part, it's about education of self and education of environment. Before you start anything, cross-cultural connection with any point, you need to understand yourself. And to understand yourself, you need to know what your biases are, what your triggers are, and what your values are. So you BTV, not MTV. Tune into BTV. So biases. A lot of times, if you're trying to figure out what biases you might have, you have to reflect on, who your closest friends are, the last 3 places you lived in, and maybe your last 3 relationships. I always ask that as well, and just reflect on things that make you feel safe. And there could be some interest there. But your biases also come from several things. They come from story, fear, avoidance, or security. So story, religion, or something that's been passed on to you, right? That's a version of a story, or something you've come to accept as truth. Fear, maybe you've had experiences with a certain group of people. They've informed your thoughts, men, women, people of color, or your white people. That fear. Security, a way for you to feel better about yourself, whether you're insecure, or a way for you to protect yourself. And avoidance, a lot of people do that now. I don't want to talk about it. But if you don't talk about any of these difficult topics, you have no idea of knowing how to do that, or knowing anything, right? You don't get to humanize or even understand another person's lived experiences. So understand.
Can I touch on that real quick and ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Because I think that's so important, and it's something that I feel very strongly towards, and I'm always looking for my own confirmation bias. And if there's a situation, I like to see, am I really looking at this objectively, or am I looking this through a confirmation bias? Yeah. And I challenge myself to look at the opposite viewpoint. What I find, though, is so many people are so ingrained in their viewpoint that they don't even understand that it's a biasness.
Yeah.
How do you poke someone to say, hey,
very hard.
Maybe you're biased on this? Because a lot of people won't even admit it to themselves that there's a biasness.
The first thing I could say, because it will make sense if I'm doing this. I want people to understand biases don't make you good or bad. There are some biases that turn into prejudices for sure, but any one of us had to have some sort of bias in order to protect. It's a protective mechanism. It's how our brains decide to do that. That's how we processed over years that we shouldn't probably step in front of a lion or any of this from several cave.
Not a good idea.
Like, don't do that, or don't put this into, all these things. So coming at it from the lens, like, okay, I always ask people this question: what are the things that make you feel safe, right? And then we'll have that type of question, and I'd say, can you potentially see a world where what makes you safe is the direct opposite of what makes another person feel safe? And then we'll have them critically think through that, and then like, I guess I could see if I'm in a place where no one likes the way I look, or I've had this type of repeated experiences, fear, avoidance, I can understand that. And having them really just process those type of things. Those are the ways that I've helped. And it doesn't always work, but I always like to do that because when I first came here, I used to get all these ignorant questions. Did you sleep with lions? Did you sleep with monkeys? What's all these things? And then I was like, when I wasn't angry, I was like, hey, let's work through that. You saw that. What informed that opinion? Well, like I watched the Lion King. Okay, so are you basing it off of cartoons, or you actually had a comment? Well, you start to see how they're like, oh, I came from that. So that's why it's very important to understand that. But the BTV, moving on with this, is the T part is the triggers. It's very important to know your triggers. What triggers you? Bullying, for example, triggers me. I've lived through that on government and the individual level. Even though I wasn't physically bullied, but I've been ostracized, right? I've been emotionally bullied. I went to boarding school as well. And that used to happen to me a lot because I was different. And so knowing your triggers helps you understand how you normally react to certain things. And when you're aware of that, you start to like, okay, this is happening. What do I do? All these things. And your values. Most people in the world don't know any of their core values. They don't know the 5 core values, the 4 core values, 3, 2, maybe they know 1. How do you know if you're a good person or a bad person, or if someone is a good person or a bad person, if you don't even know why you believe what you believe? If you don't know why you believe what you believe, you're reactive as opposed to proactive. Because something else is triggering that. Someone just got shot. Oh, shoot, we should probably have checked about the racial things here. But if you are operating, so my 5 core values are courage, curiosity, creativity, compassion, and joy. 4 C's and 1 J. If you intentionally choose to fill those value cups every day, you're going to find yourself being proactively creating environments that expose you to different things, right? Compassion, connecting someone else's suffering. Even if music is one of your things, you're going to come across, it's usually the stories on the way to sharing that music that you remember. Like, I remember that concert when I went to this person. I know you like rock and or hard rock, metal rock, because I saw you doing it. There could be different versions of how you get that. So your BTV. And then you understand the education of your environment, which is how the same set of rules affect different sets of people. And then you understand what makes people feel the core emotions, anger, sadness, joy. As you start to understand that, that's the first part of really understanding how to connect across cultures, because you're knowing your best frame of reference and understanding the environment around you. And then the don't perpetuate is, as you're informed of this, you now look at systems. What are the things that perpetuate those things? Am I going to a store that is separating hair products and calling this one ethnic hair, or food and ethnic food, or calling, all these type of things, right? Or in your workplace, or you looking at only a certain school or this, you start to see it because you're now able to look at those experiences. And then the second part is communicate, which is to your point, it's really about opening dialogue. Are you two familiar with yes and?
Yes.
Example?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, the improv technique.
Yeah, improv. Yeah. Like, that concept of itself is you build upon something, right? You don't say no, but whatever situation is thrown at you, you're not agreeing or disagreeing, you're building on it. But having the ability to let people say something, and even if you disagree, because I disagree with a lot of things, it's the ability to have heard the other side of the story and say, okay, fine. That's what you're saying. This is what I'm saying. Okay, I see what you're saying. I don't see what you're saying, but I got to hear you out. We'll see what we can do from that. So learn how to open that dialogue and understanding that it's not an immediate thing. It's a journey. It's a relationship. That's what I feel is the framework.
Ooh, so there's 2 pieces in there that I think are really great to highlight. One piece is kind of this overarching theme that we also have in the podcast, which is awareness, is circling back and knowing who you are and your biases and so on. The second piece I found out of this is the curiosity piece. So again, just being curious and the other person being open to learning this culture or whatever it may be. I thought those 2 things were stood up.
So the other big things that I really like about that is understanding, like looking inward to say, why do I believe this thing I believe? If you don't know why you believe it, it's probably reactive.
There we go.
Probably something we were taught, and maybe we can look at a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
The other one, I actually had it written down because I wanted to talk about it as well. If we believe something is a certain way, could that same set of rules affect different populations differently?
Yes.
Just because it's a rule or a law, it affects wealthy people in one way. It might affect people in poverty in one way. It might affect one culture one way, another culture a different way. And just that question that you asked, and the other one you said was, is there a world where this thing that makes you safe could make somebody else unsafe? That's such a huge question to me. You've had a lot of different experiences kind of growing up, going through a whole lot of different schools and just environments. And with that, you've been forced into being the different one in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And that was another big thing that you pointed out that people should actively try and do more of. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of expand your thoughts on that?
When you think about diplomacy, my dad was a diplomat, as I was saying, your job is essentially you get posted out to the country and your job is to collect all this piece of information, whether it's government, immigration, finance, things that could help both countries out. And what that means is you find yourself in those type of worlds. And that taps into what you were saying earlier about me bringing up curiosity. But the idea of difference is if you are the minority everywhere you go, like I was, you find that you have to learn about the quote unquote rules, the social norms or the environments or what makes people feel like an American, a Burkinabe or Vietnamese or, a Nigerian, and what makes people feel like that you belong. And when people do that, you get exposed to different lived experiences. And how I tell people to model that is find, if it's every week or every 2 weeks, find a place or an environment virtually now, safely, where you can be the minority. So if you're Christian, go to a mosque. If you're mosque, go to a synagogue, that type of thing. If you're engineering, go to your marketing team, have a conversation, grab someone off a coffee. If you like DC, spend some time reading Marvel comics. If you like all these sort of things, right? Fandoms. It's in every single area of our lives where, if you're straight, go to an LGBTQIA club, all these things, understand gender non-binary, all these things. I find that each of us have multiple things that we can learn more about, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, shoot, I didn't even know. I know of it, but I don't really know about it. And knowing of and knowing about is very different, right? And so that's just what that is, right? That's what I'm trying to say. And I mean, if I'm using African, for example, Africa is a big country. People, unfortunately, sometimes group it as a country. Like they say, it's a big country. Africa's a big country, but it's a big continent, actually.
Yeah. I was going to say, wait.
Yeah. No, but people always say, oh, yeah, it's just one big. That was at least what it was told to me. It was whenever I come there, oh, isn't that one big country, right?
Oh,
but you think about it and you understand that it's over 50 countries. And even amongst ourselves, because of the way it was formed, we had all these artificial borders with people that weren't necessarily meant to be countries or cultures or shared, that didn't have any shared history becoming one. Mm-hmm. That itself we can learn amongst ourselves within that continent. The same sort of thing can happen here in America. I'm sure Colorado's culture is different from a typical New York culture, which is different from Boston, which is different from all that. We can learn. Is the point that I'm making. And so we learn how to call continents countries, and we learn the lived experiences from other people as well.
You make a really good point, because recently somehow I like to watch a lot of React videos, specifically on like music, but this one guy came across my feed one day and I was curious. So I was like, okay, it's this guy from the UK. So just, very young guy, never left England itself. And so he's like kind of like coronavirus was like his way of looking into the world because he's just stuck in his room. So he just watches these videos, geography videos about the United States. And so he's like reacting to a video about the weird stuff in every single state, or the accents of every single state, or just like all these random videos. And I was like, I'm kind of wondering what he thinks. And so I'm watching this, and it's just kind of a surprise what he finds surprising or interesting. And I even learned some things. I'm like, I had no idea that Colorado liked that.
Yeah.
But it's just really interesting to kind of see that perspective. And so there's a lot of modalities I feel like people can prep themselves to, even, if they're feeling very shy or unavailable to have those conversations directly with someone. Just go watch a React video. It can really open you up to a conversation and connect with people across the world, like you and I on TikTok. It was just like,
exactly, that's what happened here. And it's also training your brain to understand how to get beyond the binary sometimes, because there are some things, right? Something can be hot or cold. I guess depends. Maybe actually even has some nuances. Some people say it's hot, it's cold, it's different. But understand how to expand beyond the binary, because I find that a lot of people, especially in the last year, feel like if you're saying something, that means you're automatically against me. And I go back and forth, and I'm like, wait, hold on. that's happening here, but that's not always happening here. Like, this is different from that situation. And you have to be able to have that mental capacity to understand that. And that's the reason for any war we've had. My mission statement is use your difference to make a difference. It's the name of the book. But any problem we've had throughout history has been because of someone's or group's inability to understand anything different. You know, gender and race, whatever. It's like we need to civilize these people. No, we need to take our land. We need to that's crusades, all these things. And I'm like, okay. If we don't change that, that's the danger that we have, and then you get different extremist groups.
You know, here's a good question. I think you could have some great insight on this. So people that have a certain voice, especially online, and maybe it's not even on video, maybe it's just like leaving trolling comments on videos or things like that, right? And they just have a very specific point of view, and it's very harsh in terms of what they're saying, at least online. I actually just thought of this a couple days ago because I saw a few comments on some creators I enjoy, and I was just like, the audacity and rudeness, like, holy crap. But then I asked myself, I was like, how long do they want to have this point of view? Are they even curious about opening up? And if they are, does the fact that their activity online kind of holds them back to even want to go out because they've hold this mentality vocally, at least in a way? So why would I contradict that? And then all of a sudden people say I'm a hypocrite. What would you say would be a good approach for that?
You know, something I'm a fan of, reclaiming your time and preserving your boundaries. Because there are moments, especially in my line of work, I can get anything from compliments to death threats. You have to find your your boundaries. For me, the people that are influenced by the folks I usually can work with, but I don't spend my time on a lot of the, like, let's say Trump or Kanye or, you know, someone, you know, all these is that are actively going on. But I think everyone should define their own boundaries. But to your point, a lot of these trolls, if you really do a deep dive into them, it's what we were talking about earlier. They don't know themselves or know why they think what they think. They're followers, or they're reacting. Or worse, which is why I don't like to spend a lot of time. They know what they're doing and they understand they're going to get profit from it, but they know that people wouldn't do the work to critically think through that because people are just like, this guy said it, so it must be true. You know, when you see this when you live under dictatorships. I saw you have all these propaganda, and as a kid, I was watching all these, and I'd be like, oh, okay, so this coup, there was the attempted coup in 1990, and then the successful coup in 1993. Those were the two ones, and then you just start to see the pattern. You know, someone would say something, and then in my mind, I'd be like, this person said the same thing the last person said. What do you mean? And they're like, oh, yeah. But people like to see that responsibility of critically thinking why and how. And then when it reaches critical mass, or it finally affects their pockets or their livelihood or their safety, they're like, oh, maybe I should pay attention to it. And then you've already given them enough time to amass a certain amount of power. So that's one of the reasons I don't spend time on that. But that's the boundary I've identified. Now, other people could listen and say, no, I'm really good in politics. And they could go there. And I give kudos to them. But I know that I would be eaten alive in politics because I can't keep quiet. And I'm not patient. And I feel like I would be burning all my bridges.
Right.
And other people, so that's why I say it's very important to know your boundaries. And so once you know yourself and you know your boundaries, it's very hard for those type of things to happen. But even if you get hurt by a comment, you know, my brother's on TikTok and he gets a lot as well. I always tell people to just have grace on themselves, feel those emotions, and then remind yourself of what's real and what's imagined, right?
Yeah.
You aren't this person. That person is just projecting.
So I want to bring it back for a second and kind of talk about more your business journey. Because we do have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to our podcast. So you said basically you had started a following on Twitter. You kind of turned that into a following on your podcast. What was your journey kind of past that point into your building your own business and your own brand?
Once I had quit the job and moved to the city, and I was using my MBA years to really understand myself and what I was good at. I always tell entrepreneurs to really get intimate with the problem they were trying to solve. That's what the journey I was trying to figure out. I was like, what about my experience makes me a problem solver? I know things I'm interested in. I was like, I'm interested in international relations, this or that. I love marketing. I love storytelling, all these things. And then it all came down to the idea of identifying the problem. And the problem that I wanted to solve is why people don't feel like they have spaces enough to fully be themselves. That's where it started. And so I let that was my overarching thing. I let that be a guide. And so it became the podcast. I was like, okay, if I don't know the answer myself, if I have an idea of the answer, I want to confirm it. And so I started inviting different people who grew up in the same way I did. And then I wanted to get their perspective on what they thought global identity was or how to embrace who they were. And through that, I started to notice some themes and patterns. I was like, oh, this is what I think. And this is what I thought. And then you start to get confident with that. But I encourage any entrepreneurs who are thinking about problem solving or fixing a problem, do the research for, get some data, which is what my podcast was, and figure out the trends and the uniqueness in each of these things. And then, have those means to publish those things. And once you publish them, you start to be able to test out, in entrepreneurs, we have a prototype, right? So that's your prototype. You see something worked, something you thought was going to work, didn't work, and something else surprised you. Then you get back in the lab. And so I got back in the lab. It was time to graduate, and I didn't quite know how to monetize this. So I thought, let me do a magazine, an online magazine. I'll get all these people from different parts of the world. I'll expand the podcast into that. Turns out it didn't do well, but I got information. I was like, okay, people want more of me and my story, and not me doing all that. And then I was still fighting through some imposter syndrome. I was like, me? What? I was hiding behind the idea of interviewing others. And then I started realizing, let me ask for feedback. So I would ask for feedback from the audience, not just from the guests this time. And so the audience would say, well, I really don't know what it's like to get a job here. I really don't know what it's like to work through these deep emotional feelings. I don't have any space to talk about this. And then I started sharing my stories about those things. And people were like, I thought, you start to hear, I thought it was only me, or thank you for doing that. You gave me that confidence. And then when I got, fired, I got fired twice on the path to doing this because I was taking different jobs to do this. When I finally got fired the second time, I said, enough is enough. I'm going to put everything I've learned into a framework and put it in my website. I encourage everyone to have a website. And I'm going to define myself the way I know I want others to see me. Effectively lived across, these countries, worked in these environments, understand this intimately. These are some of my frameworks. And now it's time to get clients after you've done a definition. And for clients, I identified who my ideal target audiences were. Maybe they were HR, CEOs, marketing, officials. And so I reached out to a bunch of them on LinkedIn. I said, I have this framework. I want to try it out with your audience. We can exchange referrals if you like it. Maybe I can record it if one there. And then at the same time, I just started pitching to a bunch of TEDx organizations. And eventually, some people liked what I had to say, and they started referring me out, and they started sending testimonials. At the same time, TEDx finally started saying, yeah, we like the same story that you're doing. And it all coincided with the elections, the last election. Where when Trump got elected, people started doing research on how do we get to this point where we can't talk about politics? And I had been writing about these things for years at this point, and my blog and all these things. And then it started to just show up. We're like, oh, Tayo's been talking about this. Oh, and he has a TEDx coming up here, and he's working in this company. And then they knew a central place to go because it was on my website. Right. And that was the thing. But it was a long, windy journey. But in retrospect, as you're looking at that, you start to build those foundational elements that make you easy to be found, but make your problem solving clear.
I want to highlight something here with you is that in this podcast, we tend to say what I feel like you also went through, which is you've just been prepping yourself and preparing yourself to get lucky that one day. Yep. And it's just like a lot of preparation to get lucky. And a lot of people think, oh, you get lucky to get lucky. It's like, no, it's like one of those like overnight success stories, right? You prepped for 10 years for that to happen. And so it's like, so that's really what you were doing. And it was through a curious and exploratory mindset. And I really, really appreciate that. And I think David and I both do that as well. And I think our listeners want to do more of that too. But there's this hesitation to be curious, to explore, right? Whether it's in other cultures or even just within yourself, right?
And to put the content out there is, I think, the hardest thing for a lot of people.
And I'll tell your audience this. There's the other version, the other side of this story is the near-death experience, moved to a city you don't know anyone, broke, fired twice, and figuring out how to live in the first or second most expensive city in America. These things were happening in tandem. So whenever, I don't want anyone to think that this was always happening and then nothing was there, but these things were happening. You deal with the pressure from parents. Like you shouldn't be doing this, Tayo. You have an MBA. What are you doing? Just go get it. But I was like, no, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to
keep posting my blog. This is important,
exactly.
Dad.
That's exactly what I said. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to meet up. I remember one time, it's from the place I got fired from, and we're still friends to this day. But the second time I got fired was from my boss, my mentor, I guess. He had noticed that I was doing 9 to 5 and 5 to 9. I would like do the 9 to 5 and then I'll rush out to go do some speaking engagement. And he was like, I took a peek at your calendar. And it doesn't seem like you're interested in this job. And I was like, but I can't just fire me. I need to pay rent. And he just said, you figure it out if this is what you want to do. And he just cut it off. But it was one of those things where I was very grateful he did that, because many of us were in that bar. And we don't want to let go yet because we're afraid of the fall. And the interesting thing about a fall is you can get back up if you choose to. So.
I want to point that out because that's such a ridiculous situation if you think about it, like just from face value. Like you're probably working as hard as anyone else at work. Maybe you're not the hardest worker, but you're probably not the least hardest worker.
Yeah, not the least.
But as soon as work is over, you're out.
I work enough to stay, but I don't work too hard to be noticed.
And the fact that your manager, your boss was like, hey, I notice that every day as soon as it's 5 o'clock you leave. I don't feel like you're a good fit for this workplace. And it's like, but I'm not being paid after 5 o'clock. Right. Why do I want to keep investing my time and my energy into this place? And I can be investing it back into myself. And then get fired for that. That's crazy to me because I see that happen a lot. And I come from the retail industry where it's even worse.
Oh my gosh, I can imagine. If it's retail, I can imagine. But it's just, it's one of those things where you when you're faced with yourself, you have to figure it out. And the biggest obstacle for me was figuring out how to stay in the country without, when I graduated, right? You have 1 year. They give you 1 year to find the job, or you go back home, or you go to school, all that. And so, me and my ridiculous naivety and confidence, or wherever I don't know what this thing is. I was like, I'm not gonna get it's H-1B visa. I'm not gonna get the H-1B visa, which is a visa that a company gives you if they want to hire you, and they're only limited amount every year. And it's basically a lottery system. It's essentially that. And so I was like, I don't want to do that because the chances are, as I'm still exploring myself, I don't want to be tied into the company that gives me the visa. I already did that, and I don't want to do that. And now people were like, but you're not a citizen. What do you mean? You can't just choose all these. I was like, no, I'll figure it out. I don't know where. I was just going la-di-da. And then I was doing a photo shoot because someone had said, hey, we love your podcast and it's growing and it's ranked this, it's doing that. You want to cover your story. We love your thing. And then in the process, the person interviewing me was also an international student. She said, have you ever considered the O1 visa? And I was like, I don't know what the O1 visa is. They never told us about that. It's like, it's for actors and entertainers, but for you, since you're not an actor and entertainer, you have to have an extraordinary skill. The alien is basically, the visa is called Visa for Aliens with Extraordinary Ability. You have 3 out of 7 criteria you have to meet, usually like Nobel Peace Prize winners, or you have to have something extraordinary. And so,
or a really good podcast.
You have to be,
and a charming personality.
It's not even that. So I went to my lawyer and he said, there's no way that you qualify. You haven't even done anything. And then I went back to her and I said, well, you told me about this visa. Can you recommend me to your lawyer? And then I talked to her lawyer, and the lawyer gave me the lawyer speak. She's like, well, I've seen people with less than this get it, and people with more than this get it. And I was like, but she said, but if you can find a job in addition to this, that will make it easier because you're still just starting out. And so, the job my boss had given me that fired me, that was around the time I was like, look, Rob, yes, I can work on this and that. I just need to be able to have this. And I was working there for a little bit. And I don't know what it was, divine timing, but it came at the time I needed. And so they were able to file for me under multiple employers. Myself, because of my company. I was building it, and then the company I had. So by the time I got fired, because I was already building my company and all that, it kept me in the country. And now I've been able, and since then I wrote a book. I did a few TEDx talks, and I've launched a consultant firm. But I don't know. I just was following what I felt like I needed to do, and it worked out. But it didn't look like it was going to work out for the longest time.
I love this. This has been an awesome interview. Thank you so much for being with us on this podcast. And if people want to follow you, I always suggest TikTok, but if people want to follow you or check you out, where do you suggest they should go?
Well, I think I'm the only Tayo Rockson in the world. So you just type in Tayo Rockson. You can find me on TayoRockson.com or IG, Instagram, TikTok. And my podcast is called As Told by Nomads. Or you can just get the book. Use your difference to make a difference.
There you go.
We'll put a link to that in our show notes.
All links will be in wherever these show notes are with this video and audio. So thanks for listening to the I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about or doing.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of I Don't Know What the Fuck I'm Doing podcast.
We can't do this without you, and to reward you for your support, we would like to invite you to something unique.
Go to beacons.ai/IDKWTF POD to schedule a complimentary 15-minute phone call with one of us.
You can also find a link in the description.
We're here to brainstorm with you on different solutions for your business or life.
We want to hear your feedback about our podcast or even just schedule some time to say hi.
Not only that, but anyone who chats with us will get a voucher for $100 in restaurant coupons.
Schedule some time today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.